Welcome to the Dreamboat Podcast, a place where we talk about everything dreamy, all you wanted to know about dreams and where you might find some answers. My name is Dave Billington, and I'm a psychotherapist, and I'm also director of the Dream Research Institute. And I'm joined by fellow psychotherapist Laura Payne.
Hello, I'm Laura Payne, and I'm also part of the Dream Research Institute. And we're called the Dreamboat because we are actually recording our podcast on a beautiful canal barge here at Little Venice in London called the Boat Pod.
We'll be looking at dreams, talking to guest experts, and answering your questions.
Now, let's get on with the episode.
People have been compiling manuals on dream symbolism since we've been able to write. And even today, there are hundreds of books on the subject online. We all want to know more about what our dreams are saying to us and how to interpret them.
Yes, the what does it mean question is such a popular one we get asked. What does it mean when I see a rose or when I'm going along in my car? The key thing is, should we be attached to specific meanings? Does a rose or a car come with some universal meaning attached that is the same for everyone?
Joining us today is Dr. Nigel Hamilton. He is co-founder of our sponsor, the Dream Research Institute, the DRI, as well as the founder of one of the world's top transpersonal colleges, CCPE, here in London. He is author of Awakening Through Dreams, Journeys Through the Inner Landscape, and he's a highly experienced dream worker.
Yes, welcome, Nigel. Lovely to have you here.
Thank you.
I know you've spent years studying and both pioneering techniques for working with dream symbolism. How do you like to work with it? How do you tend to sort of...
Well, my interest in symbolism comes from the fact that I work as a psychotherapist and that I use symbols as one of the main tools to help understand what's going on in a person and how that relates to the issues they present in therapy.
So give us an example of, symbols that might have some universal meaning as far as you're concerned, or do you park that up to begin with? Are you more interested in what the symbol might mean for the individual?
Well, there's two sides to the question. The one is that, of course, symbols have a universal meaning in the sense that we all know what a car is, we all know what the sun is and the moon is, what a mother and a father is. But at the same time, there's also the personal aspect, which is what does that symbol mean to you, the dreamer, you see? So it might be that a dream of, say, a female figure as a mother figure is experienced as negative, then you must take that into account rather than just think of it as a mother figure simply. So it's the personal meaning that is imbued in the symbol that counts, and that's what forms the basis of beginning to understand what the dream is trying to say. So.
Are there any specific regular symbols that you see come up when people are explaining or telling you their dreams?
Well, you can almost say there's two categories of dreams. One is dreams that appear sporadically, in which there might be some meaning to it, nothing dramatic. But there's another kind of dream that is part of a dream series. In other words, something's happening in that person's psyche that is what I call awakening. And so what one sees is a progression of a theme going through that series. In other words, you can't just take one dream out of the series and interpret it on its own. It lies within the context of a story that's been going on for right through that period of dreaming. So it's some dreams it's easy to tell because of what's going on in a person's life. You can see it reflected in the dream, but that's nothing to do with awakening. That's simply what that person is processing at night. In other words, they're trying to perhaps resolve it or come to terms with what they've experienced. Whereas when a person is experiencing awakening or the opposite, which is a breakdown, one also sees a series of dreams where you see a deterioration in the dreams, and there's a theme that runs through that deterioration. And so you're tracking that, and that tells you where that person is and how stable that their psyche is as a result.
And is that going to be something that is highly individual, or are there kind of universal symbols that might represent either that breakdown or that awakening?
Well, once again, you pay attention to what I call the feeling behind the dream, because we know that feeling is the origin of dreaming. It's not just the impression that we get from everyday life, but the actual feeling, which is something to do with the person's own inner life, reflects in the imagery. So the images, particularly images that are very powerful, carry a lot of feeling, see? And so that becomes the kind of central point to begin to, around which the whole dream hangs. See? So that's one side of it. But if the person is in a state of anxiety and there's an image of a dark shadow appearing, that's an archetypal image, but they have to discover their relationship to it for it to become personal. See, whilst it is out of their personal awareness, it's impersonal and therefore frightening and potentially overwhelming. But if they engage with it, then they begin to develop a relationship with that so-called archetypal force. But it's a force within them. It's not from something outside. It's part of the human psyche.
I suppose when you then start uncovering the depth of the symbolism, being the dreamer, that's where the healing can actually lie, that you take on board the power of that archetypal image and by making it your own.
Well, one thing I've discovered is that dreams don't lie. However you might try to explain away a dream, the dream itself is very, very important to pay attention to all the details of the dream, because the dream has a genius in it. In other words, it uses symbolism in a very, very precise way to actually describe something that's going on. You may not understand it, but the more you begin to work with it and engage with it, slowly it reveals itself to you. And so, as such, one can fool oneself by pretending that it means something different. But when you allow yourself to experience the symbol, and this is something I'll be talking about in the waking dream process that we deal with, one then begins to experience that through the body, and the body doesn't lie. And so your mind might want to interpret something in a very different way, but the body actually corrects that. And so one is then faced with the reality of the actual feeling behind the symbol. So.
And I wonder if we can maybe just take a step back and talk about what is a symbol and what makes a symbol a symbol. So there's images and there's meaning, and symbols are meaningful images. But what brings those together, and what makes a symbol significant?
Well, the first thing is why do we have symbols in dreams? What are symbols for? Well, in symbols, language began with symbols. First of all, gestures, and then it became pictures, and then it became literal script. Now, similarly, dreams form a language. So symbols are part of a language, but it's an imaginal language. It's not a literal language. That's what is so difficult about talking about symbols in a very literal way. A symbol has many layers of subtle meaning that one encounters when you work with the symbol, because according to the client's ability to be aware, the symbol reveals itself. As the client becomes more aware and more in touch with their dreams and their psyche, the symbol reveals more that is hidden in it. So you say that's why you can't really just ascribe a set meaning to a symbol. You have to explore that, but you're guided by the overall archetypal meaning, like the idea of darkness is unknown. Sometimes we associate darkness with evil. See, we associate light with something that's good. So if a dream goes from light to dark, that means the person is entering into a more unconscious part of their psyche. See? Whereas if the person starts off a dream in darkness or relative darkness, in working with the dream, using this waking dream process, you come to a stage where the landscape or the inner dream story becomes lighter. So now that you know that something's happening, that the person is actually shedding layers of associations or traumas or memories that have held them back. So.
I understand that some of your current research is looking at how we hold places. We go to specific places in dreams and where they might be within. And I can recall in working in a dream group with you, Nigel, that I went to places that I know aren't in this world, but they are within my dream memory, places that I will go to regularly and often come back in different forms. So I was just wondering where that research is taking you now.
Are you meaning places that you can remember or places that you've never seen before?
Places I've never seen before, but in my dream world, like there's a particular hotel, which is probably a conglomerate of different hotels I've been in my life, that I often end up in, and it's got a lift that I often go up and down in, for instance.
Well, one way of looking at this is the hotel being a building. It houses people. The hotel can be seen not just from your personal associations, but it is a container for the psyche. So that is its archetypal symbol. But it could be a house, it could be a prison, it could be a barn, it could be any type of container that we are sheltered from the outside world from. And then we look at, well, what is happening in that container? What is the feeling underlying that? And then one looks at the color that is present. You know, the colors often tell us something about the nature of the feeling. And so when we're going, for example, in a hotel going up the stairs, we are beginning to, so we say, transcend. Moving from one level of awareness, say more concrete awareness, to a more subtle level of awareness. And when we're coming downstairs, we're doing the opposite. So coming down personalizes, if you like, and going upwards transcends one's personal self.
I like the idea when you mentioned about colours. I think a lot of people are really fascinated by the use of colour or the appearance of colour in dreams. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
Well, colour is probably, in of itself, the origin of all imagery, because if a colour appears to you without being bounded by a form, that has a particular meaning. In other words, we can actually experience the feeling of the colour and what happens to us when we focus on it. So sometimes there are some colours we don't like because of the feeling it brings up in us. Other colours we do like, and so that tells us something about our personality. But also, it tells us something about our associations. Like you might have actually experienced an angry school teacher whose face was always very red when they were angry. Then you might have an aversion to the color red because you were traumatized. You had a traumatic experience at that time. Whereas a different color might have been a color perhaps that your mother was wearing on a scarf or a coat or dress, and that was very soothing to you. So those are personal associations. But then one can look at color beyond personal associations, in other words, free of the psychological content, then what is the experience of the color, of the pure color? And that I've discovered in my work is to do with a particular kind of quality that is coming through at a time. It has a feeling to it, and you can trace that color all the way through a series of dreams where the color begins to take shape. For example, it might begin in a dream as a rock or pebble, and then it proceeds sometime later to become a plant or a flower or a color of leaves of a tree. And then later you see that in the color of an animal or a bird or a fish. You see that color in it. And then later you see that color in a human being, the person wearing that color. And when you know that that is fully integrated is when that color is worn by the dreamer themselves. In other words, they've integrated it personally. So it's in other words, it's taken some time for that particular vibration, shall we say, that comes from, I would say, the essence of their being begins to become conscious. And so dreams actually produce symbols for two reasons. One is to talk to you about what's going wrong, trying to give you a hint to pay attention to things. Mm-hmm. And tries to give you symbols that show you the right direction for your life, like you're in the wrong job or you're in the wrong relationship, and then But of course, the ego doesn't want to know that because it's frightening. They don't want to let go, or they don't want to go into the unknown. But on the other hand, symbols are used to awaken people's consciousness. And so sometimes people have very powerful dreams. Jung was the first one to talk about that. Mm. He talks about big dreams where symbols appeared to him that had a numinous quality that transcended their personal awareness, their personal world. And it actually had such an effect. It changed the direction of their life, see? And so the symbols can be also coming from our essence that awaken us to tell us something about who we are as an individual and why, perhaps even why we're here in this world. So then symbols take on the sense of meaning, personal meaning, like it gives me a sense of direction in my life. And so those are two basic ideas about symbols. One is the more personal side of it, where it has meaning for you in terms of what you need to pay attention to, and you explore the symbols, the person's relationship to it. And just to complete that side of that question, the dream will only use symbols that you know of, that you've experienced in your life. So, for example, this is one of the examples I always give to students. When I was at university, I was sitting my final mathematics exam. I was extremely nervous, and I always felt I was unprepared. Now, whenever I have a dream about being in a mathematics exam, even though that happened decades ago, it's got nothing to do with my life now, I know that it means I'm anxious about something. So when I wake up and say, aha, what am I anxious about? And so then the symbol's done its job, and then it can release the feeling, and I know, I know what it is. It's I've got to give an interview tomorrow, or I've got to face somebody I don't want to face, or whatever.
Go on a podcast, maybe.
So in that sense, there's a real personal meaning, a sort of wake-up call. But on the other side of the question, which is, the archetypal symbols come to us that don't necessarily have personal association. They haven't really formed a part of your historical self. It's not part of your history. So it's something new, something that you've never seen before. You see? So it has a more of what I call transpersonal value. And that's why one of the reasons why I use dreams and symbolism in my transpersonal psychotherapy practice. So.
Mm-hmm. Just relating to what you were saying about your dreams of mathematics examinations, my version of that is of a job I used to have, and it was very intense. I lived in a student residence that I was responsible for managing, and kind of did everything. I was the only employee there most of the time, and for years afterwards, I would have these dreams where I found myself back in this job and in this place. And just like you said, I would know waking up from that dream, it's, not that I'm back in that place, but I'm back in that place in myself, where I'm being over responsible and trying to do everything myself, which is something I've been trying to get over for most of my adult life.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I've had an experience about living in a particular area in London during the early days of CCPE. It was a very difficult period, very difficult transit for us. And so the imagery of that, the buildings and the place, whenever it comes up in a dream, it means something in me has not so much gone backwards, but I've taken on a lot of negative things that have, it's as though I'm carrying that same old feeling. It's very similar to what you're saying, Dave.
Yeah, that same old feeling. And hopefully that comes with a choice to not have to stay with that
it's
anymore.
It's a wake-up call, yeah. Pay attention, because if you don't pay attention, the dream won't give up.
Yeah.
It'll come back again and again. And this is how nightmares begin, because you're not paying attention to what the dream is trying to say. So it has to up the ante and provide a much more dramatic kind of scenario.
Another area that both Dave and I have talked about already is the use of alchemy, particularly in dreams. It was an area that fascinated Jung. I just wondered if you could just tell us a little bit more about alchemy per se, because it has quite specific symbolism attached to some of the different stages, alchemical stages.
Yes, the alchemists really use symbols as a way of illustrating the stages of transformation. And it was, some people think of it as simply the hopeless task of trying to transform lead into gold. But it was a symbol. Alchemy is a symbol for the human transformation process. So lead being the kind of stuck process that a person's stuck in life, and leading to freedom from that, and then insight, and then being able to incorporate that insight into life such there's new light, if you like, alchemical gold. So it's a very simple, basic way of describing that. So and alchemical symbols are important because they use archetypal symbolism. But what you can see in a person's process is that they have a personalized version of those archetypal symbols. And so which lends meaning to what they are struggling with at a particular stage of the process. But at the same time, you know what's underlying it. Like alchemy talks about alchemical operations, and you can see these operations through images. So they're talking about purification, calcinatio, by fire. When you see images of fire appearing in a dream, whether it's a fire lit in a hearth in a house, or whether it's a fire in the landscape, or when it's somebody's cooking on the stove and the stove begins to get hotter and hotter, then you know it's something going on with that aspect of the psyche. And so we had the other operations like purification by water. So you get water dreams, and sometimes you get major dreams that indicate major transformation, like a flood, like we talk about the flood where Noah had to gather people together to survive the universal flooding waters. So that means that it's a major transformation happening in the person's life. See?
Sounds almost catastrophic, doesn't it?
Well, from an ego point of view, it's catastrophic because of what you attach to. But from a point of view of trusting the process, it is not. And then you have to learn to distinguish between people's process, whether it's alchemy or not, which is becoming destructive. And so sometimes, like a fire could be destructive to the psyche, like it might be the presence of a potential atomic bomb explosion that is going to destroy everything. So that's a warning sign, because it's not safe, you see. And there's a great fear around it. And so that's a warning sign to the therapist. This person needs containing. This person doesn't need stimulating. This person needs to be shored up and sort of help to deal with something that is obviously raging in them, that needs a container, a safe container.
Yeah. Yeah, I was thinking of a client who I worked with who had a dream about an aeroplane crash, and they had so much distorted air energy around it. They were destined to be hitting the ground at some stage, but it came up regularly in this dream of them being, basically the aeroplane with them inside falling out of the sky.
Yeah, we call that a coagulatio dream. In other words, the psyche knows the person is becoming more and more detached from reality or dissociating from the personal. And so it's trying to bring them down, or their tendency to dissociate no longer is sufficient, because the inner psychic force that wants to correct them becomes greater and pulls them down, crash to the ground. And of course, that is then what creates the crisis.
Yeah.
And then they receive some help and actually begin to deal with their life.
We should say, obviously, that coagulatio is transformation by the earth energy.
Yeah.
Just as an explanation. We've missed one out, haven't we? Sublimatio.
Oh, sublimatio.
That's the air, isn't it?
Well, yeah, that's one that was being all the rage in the 1960s and 70s, taking LSD and getting really high, turning on, tuning in, dropping out. Mm-hmm. Well, that was disastrous. You didn't have. In some cases, it had wonderful results, but most cases it was disastrous because people became so ungrounded and unable and impractical to be able to deal with their issues, because the magic mushrooms open you up, but without taking into account what's sitting there that could explode in your psyche. And so before one ever undertakes that, one has to go through a whole process of detoxification of the psyche. So the psyche is much clearer, and then perhaps with a more professional guide, then the person can actually journey inwards. See? And that's a very different story. And we're beginning to think about using LSD in that way now, and some 40, 50 years later.
Yeah. Yeah, and it seems to be, or there seems to be a parallel to what happens in dream work sometimes, that people are very attracted to working with their dreams, very attracted to the kind of wonderful sensations and images that they have. And then when you're working with them, it's very hard for them to remain grounded, and they start to drift off into fantasy.
So this is, this is the use of symbolism, that you realize a person who's sort of, going off into space, so to speak, as an astronaut, or they're flying higher and higher, that in fact they're becoming more disembodied.
Yes.
And what the cause of this is the tendency to fantasize rather than actually engage with their own personal reality. To fantasize, because fantasy becomes a defense.
Yeah.
It's a defense against facing something difficult they really don't want to face. And so you're then faced with the possibility of having to draw them back. And this is where we make use of the body. We get the person to begin to track the feelings in the body associated with the imagery. See? And then as they begin to focus on the body, it brings them back into the personal awareness.
I was also thinking the body as being more coagulatio, bringing them back
Yes.
into that
Yeah.
earth position.
Yes.
All starts in the body. In the end, we are a physical being.
Yeah. Well, the whole point is to create a balanced sense of self, not a sort of ungrounded sense of self that it can go in any direction in an unpredictable way. So.
What else do you like about working with alchemy as a sort of symbolic method?
Well, for me, one of the reasons I changed careers, I used to be a scientist, was I became more interested in human consciousness and human transformation than the actual, intricacies of physics. Didn't really answer these questions for me. And so alchemy, I came across, became one of the first things in reading some of Jung's books that interested me. And then in proceeding with that, I was guided on spiritual retreats that were based on the alchemical transformation process. And so that opened my interest enormously, because it led me to spaces in myself that I never knew existed. See? And it began to open up my awareness of my flaws in a way that the conventional therapy had never done so.
We're both sitting here thinking that, Nigel, you couldn't have any flaws.
Well, that's a dangerous illusion. So,
You're our guru.
No, we're all human and fallible. So.
So you approach things from an alchemical method. Do you still use that, not just for yourself, but in your own research?
When I'm studying dreams, yes, I do. I know I can understand a process now, having worked with it for decades now. That you can almost read something. When a person tells you a dream, you can read what's happening, and when you follow their dreams, you begin to see the process slowly unfolding. Sometimes it's turgid, it takes a long time. Sometimes, in some people who are ready to move forward, it happens very quickly. And it's remarkable what can happen within a short space of time. It's almost as though there was a potential waiting in the person's psyche, and then you as the therapist are put in the fortunate position of recognizing that, and it just took a slight intervention, and that opens up the doorway to the further unfoldment of their potential and their personality.
So with alchemy, I also understand that there are certain colours that are associated with the varying processes and one's own transformation during that.
Well, the most basic colours starts off with black, or that which is dark, which is associated with the first stage. It's called negredo. The second stage is associated with white, which is to do with light. They call it the light of the soul that becomes conscious. The third stage is associated with a kind of orange-yellow, which they call citrinitas. And that is this transcendental stage of alchemy. In other words, that is being the marriage of opposites, soul and spirit. And then the fourth stage is the color red, associated with what they call rubedo. So those are the four colors. Now, the white is the ascending, associated with ascending, like in sublimatio, the ascending spirit that is freed from the mind and the body. In other words, so to speak, the soul is free to fly, it's free to actually transcend the normal personalized limitations that our minds keep us on. And in Citrinitas, it is a non-existential state, which a lot of the mystics speak about. They speak about not being aware of anything personal, being only aware of a sense of bliss and oneness. And then you get rubedo, which is the fourth stage of incarnating that perfect experience into the body and into the mind. So they call that rubedo. So those are the four stages. So rubedo is the stage of descending spirit, and albedo is the white, the ascending spirit. Now, one of the interesting things is, how does this so-called spirit show itself in the process of transformation? So we see when one moves from the turgid state of nigredo, one begins to be more clear in oneself, free of your psychological complexes, or relatively free, you find colors start to appear in the dreams. And one of the colors that is most often appearing is green. And so if you think about it, why green? Well, what's special about green? Why not orange or yellow? Well, green, of course, is associated with water. You think of springtime. Coming out of wintertime, the forests become green. So it's new life, see? And so it's almost as though something in the person is becoming more alive.
It's that greening, it's often known as.
The greening,
The
yeah.
ancients,
Whereas in the nigredo state, we were relatively dead or relatively asleep. See? When I say asleep, I mean in the sense of not being conscious enough.
Yeah, it's almost got that void feeling about it.
So, then you get the colors, and the green continues. But one interesting thing is what happens is that when you get to the third state of Citrinitas, landscapes appear in your dreams that become luminous green.
Wow, you wouldn't imagine that, would you? Because
No.
Trinitas, I'm always thinking of it being yellow as such.
Well, no. Well, the actual experience of Citrinitas in alchemy is of burning. Everything is burned away, and there's nothing left of the psyche. Of course, to a psychologist, that sounds terrifying. But to the mystic, that is exactly what they're aiming for, is a sense of oneness. Now, in that state, the landscapes, as they say, of the soul, of your inner world, become luminous green. It's like you see the most beautiful luminous green forests and hills and dales, and then with lakes alongside. In other words, it's what we call an idealistic landscape, and one begins to think of the images of the Bible. Of Adam and Eve in heaven, so to speak. One begins to wonder about that, the origin of that story. And so what is the state we're approaching? So now, then I don't want to talk about it because that's about mysticism, but I'm talking about symbolism. I would watch the process of appearance of green in my dreams during my own spiritual transit. And what I found was that at a certain stage, the green became luminous, and then the luminosity of the green increased with the dreams. I began to look at all the colors. I went back over the dreams, looked at all the colors that appeared in the imagery, and plotted them out in terms of their frequency they appeared, and then measured that against the appearance of green. And you can see initially green appears amongst all the others, very much like, you get green flowers amongst red flowers, amongst blue flowers. But then gradually the green began to dominate. And at a certain point became luminous green. And then at a certain point, the luminous green colors began to dominate. And so, looking up some of the original mystical text, one of the things you see, for example, in St. John of the Cross description of his spiritual rebirth, he talked about the beautiful greening of the landscape.
I was thinking of the long dark night of the soul and the Grados.
And and so you think in I think as is Buddhism, the green Tara, the myth of the green Tara, and we think of the Arthurian legend of the green man.
I was thinking of the green and Khidr in the
and in Islam they talk about Khidr, the green. The green appears to you as the sign of spirit is starting to flow, or the life force is starting to flow. So this is how symbolism works. We can't take the symbol literally in itself, as though, well, there's green appearing in your inner world and that's real, because what we're told in symbolism, in mysticism, is that this is the way reality appears to us through a symbol. It must not be confused with reality itself, because reality itself cannot be described, because to describe it is to enter into the existential realm. So but it's a symbol that tells you what you're experiencing, and through its beauty and its awesome light.
What I like about this as an example is it shows you not just the transcendent nature of it, but the archetypal nature of it, that it has transcended and it sits in so many different cultures in some way, means that it has great import.
It's alchemy in itself is found in China, being found in China, in India, across the Middle East, and there even has been European alchemy. And one finds even in some of the original traditions in Africa and the indigenous peoples of America, South America, that in their rituals, the alchemical colors are involved. In other words, it is a universal language. And because alchemy in Egypt began in Africa. Perhaps it spread from there, but it's an ancient knowledge, but it's based on the people's spiritual experience. It's nothing to do with anything material, as is often criticized. It's just a simple, foolish idea of trying to transform material world into something valuable.
That's fool's gold.
Yeah, it's fool's gold. Yeah.
I was just thinking about working with psychotherapy clients and working with people in dream groups, and noticing that there are these kind of symbolic landscapes, which I think you've talked about before as well, that you can see people are in a constructed landscape of the city, maybe a different kind of city for different people at different times. And then as people continue to work with themselves and get to know themselves, they enter into, or their dreams enter into these landscapes which are green. And it's, as they get in touch with their nature, they have a natural environment that they're experiencing in their dreams as well. Would you see it that way?
Yes, I agree. That's what one observes. You see, you work with the person's personal material first. In other words, the dreams which are perhaps mixed up, confused, perhaps sort of labyrinthian in their nature. The person is seeking. They're confused. They're needing to understand themselves. And after a considerable period of time, when you begin to balance the psyche, it's what I call symmetry appears. Now, symmetry shows itself through a symbol, and you see that the symbol, very basic symbols like a square or a rectangle appears, and that indicates that the forces, opposing forces, because alchemy is about opposites, balancing opposites, those opposing forces balance out both on the left and right, and top and below, above and below, or the other two sides. So that's a symmetrical symbol. And when those kinds of symbols appear, for example, it might be in the form of a square house, or it might be in the form of a table around which the dreamer is sitting that is square, and they are faced with one person in front and two people at the sides. You've got four. Jung often talked about four as the quaternity. In other words, symbolizing something has been accomplished, something's being stabilized in the process. So now you know you're beginning to move slowly from the personal beyond. Now, from that point onwards, presumably that's being achieved, the dreams start to change. And so they change from very personal settings like being in the office, talking to your friends, being with your family, being in a nightmare, getting lost, all those kinds of dreams, to actually moving out of those personal landscapes, and particularly out of what I call a city landscape, because a city is a place of the mind. You're moving out of the mind, and so what you find is the landscapes start to become more like gardens, natural gardens. So there's the appearance of green, and you see flowers and various things, gardens that are ornate, and then that changes to become like a more natural landscape, like a forest or a valley or a mountain. And so, but again, the green is the predominant color. So then now you have moved into the person's nature, what I would call their soul nature, that is free of the scripts of the mind and the impact of the mind that hits us on a daily basis. You're free of that.
That conditioning of early life,
the conditioning
daily life.
of early life, all those kinds of things. And so, but then it can even change, because those landscapes, natural landscapes, can actually begin to reveal characters in them that can be a guide, like a wise guide, wise man or woman. Or it could be somebody in the landscape invites you to a healing ritual, So in other words, you're starting to move into something very different. And then we talked about landscapes where they become very beautiful and very pure, very innocent, One thinks of the idea of virginal forests, and being with children who are very pure. So something of that purity of your being or your soul is coming through. It's not the fact that you have little children and you say they symbolize that. Mm-hmm. And then you can move on to other landscapes where eventually, you get confronted with this whole issue of light versus dark, and we call that the kind of that's the great test of truth of your being. So, so that kind of landscape, very different to the beautiful landscape. It is more fiery. Mm-hmm. And then you move on, and sometimes people go into landscapes that become really truly amazing. Like they encounter buildings that are incredibly ornate and beautiful. So there's something very rich about the psyche that is being revealed to the person. Now that's on a symbolic level. But the actual literal experience, from the point of the mystic, is that the person actually experiences in terms of light. Mm. In other words, it's free of the symbols. It is a more direct experience. Or people actually have what you call profound visions of light and. So that when the need for the mind has become totally transparent, there's no need for the mind to understand anything.
So you're actually moving beyond symbolism.
You're moving beyond symbolism.
Yeah. And beyond images. Completely.
Beyond images, yeah. But for most people, it's really working with the personal images and helping them with that.
So just a quick reminder that you can currently join the DRI as a member for just £10 a year and be part of the bigger discussion on all things dreaming, as well as support the podcast and our research. Links about membership benefits are below in the show notes, and you can find out more at driccpe.org.uk. Now let's go over to our dream of the week. And Nigel, I think you said you had a couple of dreams that might illustrate some important points for us.
I had a dream once in which it was on a spiritual retreat. And so clearly the purpose of the retreat is to become more conscious, more aware. And it was a particular stage of the retreat. And in this dream, I was wandering around the city, and a lady approached me. She had a funny green turban on her head. And now I recognized her from somebody I knew. So it was, that seemed like personal, some kind of recollection of somebody. But actually, she took me on a tour through the city. And I remember looking up at the sky, because it was, the city wasn't that sunny. It was sort of slightly cloudy in a sense, except there weren't clouds. And I looked up in the sky and I could see this haze of what we would call pollution. And it was, you could see a little bit through it, but it was clearly there. And I said, "Oh, what is that?" And she said, "That's your mind." So to me, I woke up thinking, well, that's a very clear message about the way I'm thinking. That needs clearing. So that would become part of the drive to empty the mind as much as possible, to go beyond that.
I was wondering whether we have a quick interpretation of that, shall we? If we dare, Dave.
Well, certainly. I mean, I'm really interested that it's the female character that you encounter that gives you this direct message.
She was what we would call the Sophia figure, the guide.
The anima as well.
But the anima, Jung would call that the anima, that knows perfectly well, knows you better than you know yourself, and knows exactly what you're doing, and also what you need to do, and is saying, okay, so you're at this point of your understanding of yourself. Now have a look at this.
Also, you mentioned earlier on about the city being associated with the mind, so you're touring the city. But I like the fact that the mind is covered in a green turban, so there's this mystic feel that we all know you have, Nigel. And it's green, your colour.
So that was one dream. That is not. It sounds like it's personal in the sense it's a message for me, but actually it's impersonal, because there's nothing psychological about it. It's like saying, well, your problem is that you talk too much, or your problem is you don't listen, or your problem is you mistreat people, or whatever. It's just not a personal message. It's simply about something that's there. It's a matter of fact. It's not a psychological issue. And then the second dream was one in which I became lucid. And I remember flying over the Thames. So in thinking, it was one of the early days of becoming lucid in my dreams. And so then I remember seeing my son. And I said to him, look, you can see I'm flying. So my son said, yes, Dad. He said, we know, we all do that already anyway, which was a psychological message, because it's not really my son. It's really something in me telling me, the more innocent part of me telling me, look, this is not a big deal. This is not a big breakthrough. This is ordinary, actually. It's playful stuff. It's not, the idea of spiritual realization doesn't come just from this, see?
I was thinking also that the inner child, the innocence of the inner child, also bringing you down to earth, right? Both literally and metaphorically.
Yes, I was deflated from that.
Yes,
Instead of waking up inflated, I've been lucid dreaming. I must tell everyone I was deflated and thought about it seriously. So and there was another one I had. It's a very quick dream, one I often tell. It was night time, so it's a time of darkness, but there were lights in this town, and I was on the first floor of a house looking through the window down onto the street and at the row of terraced houses opposite. And as I watched, the door of one of the houses opened and a man came out, and then he went next door through their door, entered into the second house. And then he came out the first house again and went back in the second one. And this went on and on and on. And I thought, what's going on? How stupid, you see? And then I woke up and I thought about it. I thought, that's me. That's showing me my obsessive thinking that goes round and round and round. It doesn't get anywhere. So it was a useful piece of feedback that's showing me through symbols in a way that I would understand, I could then do something about it. So,
well, a very interesting selection of dreams. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Hamilton. They've been really fascinating and a great way of illuminating this whole massive area, which I feel that, to use the scratching image, we're just scratching at the surface of the area of symbolism, but obviously something to return to. So thank you very much indeed for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. So.
We'll hope to have you back soon. Keep dreaming and keep sharing your dreams.
So, thank you for joining us for this week's episode. Don't forget to like us and leave comments on your favourite podcast platform. As I'm sure you know, that's the way we build an audience for the Dreamboat podcast and also to spread news about dreaming. And as we said, there are many ways you can share your dreams at the DRI, the Dream Research Institute.
Yes, we have courses, events, and workshops, and we want to hear from you. So check out the show note for links, or find us on Instagram as the Dreamboat Podcast, on our Facebook page as Dreamboat Podcast, on Twitter as @DreamboatPod, or come and find us at driccpe.org.uk. That's driccpe.org.uk. And you can email us on driinfo@ccpe.org.uk. Once again, that's driinfo@ccpe.org.uk. And if you want to explore your dreams further, or would like to support us, you can join the DRI as a member for just £10 a year. Yes, £10 a year. As a member, you will get discounts for our events and short courses. You'll get our newsletter with the latest dream research news, and we will also be adding other special member benefits during the year. Of course, members' dreams will always be given preference for reading on the podcast Dream of the Week slot. This low offer of £10 membership will last through to the end of June 2023. So go to the link on the show notes and become a DRI member today. Keep dreaming and keep sharing your dreams.